Good day and welcome back to Hvar, RELICS, Croatia. Today we are climbing 161 meters or 3,152 feet to the very peak of St. Elias, a silent giant that once served as a critical German mountain fortress overlooking the Adriatic. St. Elias is the highest peak of Peljesac Peninsula, the second largest peninsula on the Croatian side of the Adriatic. It is a premier hiking destination with one of the best views in the Mediterranean, visited by thousands of hikers, especially during the summer months. The mountain was once called Monte Vipera, or Viper's Mountain, due to the abundant presence of nose-horned viper, Europe's most venomous snake. What most tourists don't know, just as most residents who live at the foot of St. Elias today, is that during Second World War there was a strong German stronghold up there. The St. Elias Trail was built back in 1908, when this part of Croatia was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So, let's embark on another adventure along this trail with Hvar, RELICS, Croatia. The trail actually starts in Neretva, a small town on the coast of the Peljesac Channel that separates the Peljesac Peninsula from the island of Korcula. A town with a rich maritime history that is located at sea level and trail climbs to a 961 meters high peak. So on the way up you need to overcome an altitude difference of almost 1 kilometer. This will take you almost 3 hours and a lot of sweat on your face. The Austro-Hungarian Empire built a trail that leads to the very top, which probably followed the same route that already existed and led to an ancient sanctuary and a chapel destroyed by lightning at the very top. At the beginning of the 20th century, the trail was supposed to serve the Austro-Hungarian aristocracy for hunting. They also built this watering hole for horses, as well as this hunting lodge located below the very top. After the capitulation of Italy in early September 1943, the Germans occupied the Adriatic coast, and at the end of October they launched Operation Herbstgewitter 1, which aimed to capture Peljesac in 1 to 2 days. Fierce fighting would last 21 days, and Operation Herbstgewitter 1 itself ended on November 14, 1943, with the capture of the very peak of St. Elias. I can assume that they already set up an artillery reconnaissance post up there for an attack on the island of Korcula, which was now separated from Peljesac by sea. However, the final decision to fortify the Adriatic coast was made by the German command in early February of 1944 for two reasons. The first reason is the presence of American and British troops who are in southern Italy and are fighting in the Apennines, trying to break through to Rome through the German winter line. If you remember the battles for Monte Cassino, you know what I'm talking about. Therefore, the eastern Adriatic coast becomes the right flank of the Allied forces, and the Germans are afraid that the Allies will land right here in the southern Adriatic, hitting the soft belly of the Third Reich. The second reason is the island of Vis. Why? The island of Vis, together with the island of Lastovo, is outside the German control, and from the beginning of January it becomes a partisan fortress to which British and American commandos come as reinforcements. It is precisely these combined forces that will attack isolated German garrisons along the Adriatic, just like the one on the western part of Peljesac Peninsula, with the stronghold on top of the St. Elias. My first realization that there was a Second World War stronghold on the top of St. Elias was when I went down into this pit, which is located directly below the top itself, almost 20 years ago when I was a young caver. What I found down there surprised me. It was artillery ammunition for 75mm gun, mines for 81mm mortar, as well as 20mm rounds for Flak. I reported the find to the police, after which a team for unexploded ordnance descended into the pit. At that time I was not involved in what I am involved in today, but exactly such findings slowly awakened in me a passion for modern conflict archaeology. Taking into account that there was at least one 75mm cannon, one 81mm mortar, and one 20mm flak on the top of St. Elias, it could be said that the top was a strong point that numbered some 35 to 60 people. That's kind of my assessment. That it was a well-established strong point is indicated by the finding of this barbed wire, as well as this one. What I'm holding in my hands is the outer cylinder of the famous Second World War German anti-personnel mine, the S mine, or as the American soldiers called it, the bouncing Betty. These two findings confirm that it was a well-defended permanent position and represented the standard lateral perimeter. So, the S mine, or Shrapnelmine, Springmine, or Splittermine, was the most infamous mine of the Second World War. The mine's design was intended to inflict serious debilitating injuries, often to the lower body, like limbs and genitals, rather than simply killing, which put a heavy strain on the enemy's logistical and medical resources and created a significant psychological effect. So how the S-mine worked? The S-mine used two-stage detonation process. First, let's start with triggering. The mine was typically buried with only the small three-pronged pressure fuse exposed, though tripwire adapters were also used. Stepping on or pulling the tripwire would trigger the fuse. The fuse would initiate a delay of approximately 3.9 to 4.5 seconds. This delay was often misunderstood by Allied soldiers, leading to the common but false movie trope that the mine only detonated when the victim stepped off the trigger. After the delay, a small black powder propelling charge would fire, launching the main body of the mine, like the cylinder, from the ground to a height of about 0.9 to 1.5 meters, or 3 to 5 feet, which is roughly waist level. Less than a second after a launch, the main TNT charge would detonate. This explosion projected a lethal spray of about 360 steel bolts, short steel rods, or shrapnel horizontally across the area. The lethal range, according to German documentation, was some 20 meters or 66 feet, and could inflict casualties out to 100 meters or 330 feet. American training manuals sometimes warned of casualties up to 140 meters or 460 feet. The most effective, though difficult way to survive a triggered S-mine was not to run, but to immediately drop to the ground and lie face down as quickly as possible, allowing the shrapnel to pass over. The S-mine entered production in 1935, and Germany produced over 1.93 million units until 1945. There were two models, the SMI-35 and slightly modified SMI-44. S-mines were placed every 5 to 10 meters, which suggests that there were dozens of these mines here. Probably 50 to 150 pieces, considering the defense perimeter. Today, as I mentioned, St. Elias is an exceptionally visited destination, and my personal opinion is that there really shouldn't be any danger, especially if you stick to the trail. But I had to mention this. What I'm holding is ordinary harmless metal, but in communication with deminers, they told me that they have indeed found still potentially functional S-mines around Croatia. One such case was a few years ago on Croatian island near Zadar. In the event of finding an entire mine, it is imperative to notify the police and not to touch it yet. People are still dying today from pyrotechnic devices from the First World War, which ended more than a century ago. So the lethality of these devices should not be underestimated. So there was a reason for all these S-mines, barbed wire and security. And that was at least one gun on the top of St.Elias. As I already mentioned, it was a 75mm gun, and most likely the Škoda M.15 model, a gun that actually belongs to the First World War as the best mounted gun of the Alpine theater. However, it was also used in 1944 on the highest peak of Peljesac Peninsula. Here we can see casings. This is the remnant of the body of grenade itself. To emphasize, this is ordinary metal. This is bakelite cover for the propellant, on which it is clearly written which gun it is for. Bakelite is their first plastic, and the Germans used it a lot in the Second World War. So this was Herbstgewitter M.15 position. The gun itself weighed about 600 kilograms and could be assembled into 7 parts. The crew consisted of 6 people. The shells weighed around 6 kilograms, and the maximum range of the cannon was about 8 kilometers. Which means that the entire Peljesac channel, the channel between the island of Korcula and Peljesac Peninsula, the town of Korcula, and the entire coast of Orebić garrison on western part of Peljesac was controlled from this place. The remains of this cannon were found at the foot of St. Elias a few years ago, and it may be the cannon that was at very top, although I sincerely doubt that it is the cannon that was at the top. The mortar on the top was a standard German Second World War 8 cm mortar. The effective range was from 400 to 1200 meters, while the maximum range was 3 kilometers. The mortar could have been up there for the defense of the position itself. However, it could also act on crucial points that could be used for landing in the defended area. The crew of mortar consists of 3 to 5 people. The mortar itself weighed about 60 kilograms, and each mine weighed 3 kilograms. There was at least one 20mm flak on the top. Let's assume that it was 420 kilogram single barrel gun with a crew of 5 people. Namely, at the time when the Germans came to the top of St. Elias, air bases had already been established in the south of Italy in the Foggia region. Let's say an American P-40 Warhawk fighter located at the base in Amendola in the south of Italy took about 20 to 30 minutes to cross the Adriatic Sea. As you can see, the Amendola air base still exists today, and it is the only military base of the former 30 or so in the Foggia region that existed from the end of 1943 to the summer of 1945, when the war in Europe ended. I cite this specific example because on December 2nd, 1943, a P-40 fighter plane will fall at the foot of St. Elias, and its pilot, Louis Frank, will be the first Allied pilot rescued and evacuated by the partisans in Yugoslavia at that time. I found the crash site in April 2021, but that's another story. So, the Allied Air Force flew over the strongpoint very often. It would be truly valuable to find some record of it, but such material is lost in space and time. But let's go back to that hiking trail built way back in 1908. So every day supplies had to go to the isolated peak. Each German soldier needed at least 3 kilograms of basic supplies on this isolated position. So at least 2.5 liters of water and 0.5 kilograms of food. So we are talking about 3 kilograms of the most basic supplies every day. And I already mentioned that my estimate is that the peak was served by 35 to 60 soldiers. Let's round it to 50. So at least 150 kilograms of basic supplies were climbed every day to 961 meters high peak, without ammunition and other logistical necessities. All that load was probably carried on mules every morning, and it must have taken them 4 to 5 hours to climb, and about 6 to 8 hours for the round trip. But I will also mention one specific feature of this battlefield in Second World War. The Germans used Italian soldiers captured after the capitulation of Italy in September 1943 as labor and porters, so it is easy to assume that Italian soldiers transported a lot of things along this path. I would also mention that the summers here are unbearably hot, and that the logistical demands for water must have been even greater during the summer heat. In just the last 20 years, it was the summer heat that claimed at least 5 lives of tourists hiking this mountain. The peak of St. Elias was practically advanced position for Orebić garrison. In that time, German forces didn't have enough forces to control all land on peninsula, so they had garrisons. One of them was, and one of the most important ones, was Orebić. So on the top of St. Elias, there were the members of 750 Regiment of 118 Division, and also the elements of 668 Artillery Regiment of the same division. The commander of 750 Regiment of the 118th Division was Gunter Tribucate, convicted of war crimes in the former Yugoslavia, including crimes on Peljesac itself and on the island of Korcula. In one case, his soldiers even took photos with dead women and babies in diapers. He had a command in Orebić itself. On December 22nd, 1943, this very unit, together with the German commandos from Brandenburg, attacked the island of Korcula. On that same day, a German Messerschmitt fighter crashed in the ravine of the St. Elias massif, which the German soldiers who would later build a stronghold on the very top never knew about. I found the aircraft in the remoteness of St. Elias in January 2021, but that's another story. In any case, let's try to imagine the life of a German soldier on this lonely peak that controlled a good part of the Adriatic, and the German coastal communication that led from Greece all the way to the northern ports of the Adriatic like Trieste. The area behind the garrison itself was no man's land, essentially controlled by the partisans. Light aircraft were flying overhead all the time. Small fighter bombers were just attacking targets like this on the top of St. Elias. And there were also air fortresses like B-24s that flew at high altitude from air bases in southern Italy, flying over the Strongpoint and leaving contrails behind them into the very heart of the Third Reich, heralding its end. And the end would come at the end of August 1944, when Red Army units penetrated Romania and Bulgaria. On September 1st, 1944, the order came for the 118th Division to slowly begin withdrawing from Dalmatia. Everything I have told you is essentially quite unknown. The problem is that important archaeological material from the German side was lost in the whirlwind of war. Today, St. Elias is a top hiking location with extremely beautiful nature, and on clear days, the view reaches all the way to the Italian coast and Monte Gargano, at the foot of which the Allied air bases were located. The St. Elias massif itself, with its foothills in the area of Nakovano Plateau, as one of the most distinctive Illyrian sites in the world, should be declared a nature park. Until the next story from the Neretva karsts, greetings, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and support my work.